All right. Oh, nope. We're not coming through the right mic. Let's try that again. All right. Yep. We are good. Make sure. Yep. Yeah, cool. Fantastic. What's up, everybody? We are jumping into it. All right. All right. So another Bearded Geek live. Um, Let me just make sure all the channels are all set up, and then we will jump into it. All right. So yeah, we are we're doing a live talking about some of the stories that I want to see in the DC live action universe, as well as talking about this picture that we saw, that we were given by James Gunn from the Superman movie. There is a mural that is shown quickly in Superman that shows essentially um a reflection of um DC's the DCU's history. Um the quote he says is, "It's canon that this is a mural in the Hall of Justice." Yes. So we take that with, I guess, a grain of salt, in the sense of it's canon that it exists, but there is probably more to the story on exactly why this is there, or how it came to be, or whatever the case may be. But these are the benefits to having a universe where A, everything is already moving, and B, we are not beholden to Soups being the first. And this is why it matters that we are establishing a universe that's already moving and active. And so we're going to roll through the characters that are showcased in the two murals. There's two sides of it in the Hall of Justice. So we have Sister Symmetry, who's one of the cosmic lords of order. Silent Knight, Brian Kent. Extros, an exiled Amazon warrior. The Black Pirate, Miss Liberty, Whip Whirlwind, who I am incredibly excited for, because Whip Whirlwind is a speedster in the Old West who later travels forward to become none other than Max Mercury. Super Chief El Diablo, Joe Morgan, who is the trainer of Ted Grant Wildcat. Ghost of Flanders, the Sandman, Amazing Man, John Zatara, Liberty Bell, Bullet Man, Max Mercury. His double inclusion suggests that his time travel isn't public knowledge. Bullet Girl, TNT, Dan the Dynamite, Phantom Lady, Atomic Knight, Freedom Beast, Wildcat, Vibe, Gunfire, and Maxwell Lord, the founder and financer of the Justice Gang. So, definitely it'll be interesting to see how they explain all of the individual pieces that are involved in this lineup, all of the individual characters that are on this mural, because generally you have a particular chronology that when you're looking at the history of the DC universe, you kind of go in a particular order. And the way that they're arranging these, and honestly, the characters that they included, would suggest that they're not going typical. And this is me theorizing here, that if Maxwell Lord is included in the picture, that was financed and created by Maxwell Lord for a specific purpose. Now, whether or not he's going to have a connection to each one of those heroes remains to be seen, or if he just financed an image of all of those heroes from throughout history and then put himself in there because it's his Hall of Justice. I think it'll be an interesting I think it'll be interesting to see. But I do think that he will in some way, shape, or form be tied into the greater storytelling. Now, we'll get to one of the um storylines that I think will come, though I'm not gonna lie, I'm not overly excited about it, but again, we will get there. Um that I could see some of these heroes coming by way of the JSA and the more classic earlier iterations of superhero teams that we've come to know. So, and just an interesting lineup of people that are included in this mural, because even with the JSA, you you normally don't, some of those characters you would think of, but other ones you wouldn't necessarily. So I do think that they are going for something unique in the way that they're presenting it. But we might as well get right into the first story that has been making the rounds ever since this was shown, and with some of the comments that James Gunn has made, and that's JSA World War II. 9 times out of 10, when you hear JSA, you think of World War II. They go hand in hand. I'm just not overly excited to see the JSA fight Nazis. I don't know. There's something about it that it just it feels like we would need to do something with it. I don't want a superhero team fighting Nazis for the sake of just for the sake of it. I would want either characters that we wouldn't normally see, or something to tie it in to the larger continuity, and not just a flashback movie for the sake of a flashback movie. So World War II is like the central time for the JSA, and you would think that it would bring together Alan Scott, Jay Garrick, and Wonder Woman to take on the Nazis. And there's a world where, like, I would hope that somebody like Vandal Savage maybe could get tied into this, or Wonder Woman be a piece of connective tissue from one age to the next, and that in some way, shape, or form it's still connected to the greater DC universe, and not just kind of sitting back. And maybe it's because Wonder Woman 1984 is still like permanently etched in the back of my mind. Um, you know, that movie was terrible, and so I'm soured on it because of that. But I think that's probably bound to happen. I'm very middle of the road as far as that goes. I'm too busy looking ahead to other stories. Um, so with Superman, we get the way that Superman was presented. It could go a couple of different directions. Now, James Gunn has talked about how Superman there isn't going to be a direct Superman 2. Whether or not that happens remains to be seen. But I think it is a layup to have World's Finest be on the docket. Now, I know that there is a movie coming that's titled World's Finest, but my hope for World's Finest is Batman and Superman really and truly being juxtaposed from one another, not just two different people with essentially the same kind of disposition, but really see a dichotomy and difference between the between like a stoic or sullen or brooding Batman and David Cornsweet's optimistic hopeful Superman. I think that would really make for a compelling contrast of personalities that could really be prime fodder to again feel like you're just ripping a comic book and putting it on the big screen. Now, there is a specific um era of World's Finest by Mark Waid and Dan Mora that could serve as like a Silver Age style story, almost like Superman was. Superman was very Silver Age coded. And so my hope is that that's the direction that we go in. And my hope would be that the team up would act as connective tissue into the larger universe, but specifically by way of the villain. Now, I talked about in a previous video the fact that I really fundamentally believe that that there is a lot of potential in the villains of this DC universe without retreading all of the same villains that we've always done. Like Darkseid, I don't think it should be touched until he is your Thanos, he is your big bad, he is your ultimate evil. Doomsday need to stay far away from Doomsday. We don't need the death of Superman again. Seriously, we don't need the death of Superman again. There are a lot of really compelling characters in Superman's mythology that you can touch on, and one of which being Brainiac. I think a Brainiac clone as the big bad for World's Finest team up sets the stage for what could be a really cool progression into a later um Justice League level story where we find out that there have been like clones, copies of Brainiac all along the way, but they never were like the real Brainiac. And you're finally building towards like a full team up level event. But this is just like the opening salvo. And that's where like we don't need to have a rotating cast of villains that we just kill off at the end. We can have reoccurring villains in a way that we haven't seen before. It gives a different flavor, and on top of it, it gives the weight that these characters need. Because the thing about DC that they've seemed to struggle with thus far in live action is DC is the land of gods and monsters. DC is the land of larger than life heroes. DC is the land of mythology come to life, where really at its roots, Marvel sits more at the level of grounded, with some like multiverse shenanigans and things like that thrown in for good measure. And so establishing a credible threat that doesn't get taken out in one could be a really good, like, could prove as a really good storytelling device. And so my hope is for their team up, we go Brainiac, because I don't think we need another. I think Lex Luthor now needs to team up or be a part of a larger context rather than being another standalone story. And I think it loses something if we don't take the opportunity to start introducing more and more and more and more into the world, and then build towards like the Legion of Supervillains, or build towards Lex and Brainiac teaming up together and having that. Oh man, a second World's Finest. Okay, track with me here. First World's Finest, we have a one-on-one, well, one-on-two. These two against Brainiac. They take out the clone. We move on. We have movies in between, and then World's Finest 2 is a team up 2v2 Brainiac and Lex, and that leads into a Justice League movie where we get that, like a more fleshed out version of all of that. That would be awesome. Also, Alan Tudyk's character in the cave, I fundamentally believe that his android needs to be the entryway into telling the Brainiac story. I think that just adds something really cool to the story, that he ends up being the way that Brainiac gets brought into the overall story. Um, so we've got World's Finest, and we even have a World's Finest number two. I would take, okay, hang on, scrap World's Finest number two. Actually, World's Finest number two, that's fine, but we get the Trinity, like World's Finest two, the Trinity, something along those lines. Working title. Come back to me on that one. But we introduce Wonder Woman, and it's Lex and Brainiac against the Trinity, and that again comes out into a full blown Justice League movie. But I think the long and the short of it is, I fundamentally want to see Superman and Batman truly played off of each other, not just against each other, and not just two different sides of the same brutish coin, but really showcase what those team ups can look like. Because I think that you can have something special by trying to capture that 50s to 70s, early 80s vibe of Batman and Superman and their relationship with one another. Next up, let's take a look at Wonder Woman. So Wonder Woman is complicated because Wonder Woman is incredibly convoluted, and I think establishing the greater universe as being one that has moving pieces, that has a long history to it, really serves, or at least can serve, um her character really well. So I don't think we need to just turn back to she's a part of the Justice Society, and she's in World War II, and all of that sort of stuff. I just don't think we need to go there when telling her story. I think we can lean more heavily on the history of Themyscira and the Amazons. rather than her history as specifically a superhero. Tell her story as a god first and foremost, without necessarily like overcomplicating the timeline of events. A little nod and a wink and a reference and all of that sort of stuff, sure, no problem. You're not going to get a complaint out of me. But allow her allow her story to flourish, and that there is one storyline in particular that I think does that probably better than just about any, and that's Wonder Woman the Lies. Wonder Woman the Lies was a part of the DC Rebirth run where she comes back and she questions whether or not she ever left Themyscira and why, all of that sort of thing. And it's this question of is she actually like, what is her story and why does it seem like she can't remember her actual history? And it literally jumps into the actual convoluted nature of her history. um it jumps in both feet, and that's why I think there's a lot of potential in that particular run, because you're talking about a Wonder Woman who finds her memories changing, and she returns and tests one of her memories by trying to crush the helmet of war easily, which is impossible. Then she uses her lasso to probe deeper and finds out that she's been deceived, and she goes to Olympus and concludes that she's shrouded in lies. And so, and one of the really compelling parts of this can be a team up with Wonder Woman and Cheetah. So immediately you bring Cheetah into her story and into the mythos, and you're already establishing all of the moving characters, and instead of having this over arc or this departure from the timeline and going into the World War II, you can use this as almost like a clip show to tell some of her story. And you can have flashbacks to her with different teams over the years and all of that. You can have a a mode of storytelling that allows you to go through Wonder Woman's history with her, because the reality is, out of everybody, right? Most casuals are the least likely to know Wonder Woman's history. And especially if you're talking about a crowd that wasn't a big fan of Gal Gadot's outing as Wonder Woman, you don't need to retread the same story of her going back to a world war and her fighting in a world war, while still being able to flesh out her story through the lens of Themyscira, through the lens of everything that led up to that point and her history as an Amazonian. There is a TV show that has been announced, Paradise Lost, that is supposed to be coming out. That's supposed to be pre Wonder Woman. My hope is that it ends with the birth of Wonder Woman, and that, like, in between, being left ambiguous. So we cut off with Paradise Lost with the birth of Wonder Woman, and then Wonder Woman is a full-blown hero and cannot remember the time in between. And if you want to, there are stories that you can tell either in a season 2, where you adapt season 2 into a riff on Wonder Woman the Circle, or you can go the route of just, doing it all kind of through flashbacks, but along the way, if you play it right, you can bleed that into Wonder Woman War of the Gods, where you get the really her fleshing out her mythological side when coming in conflict with Cersei, who attempts to cause mass conflicts across multiple pantheons of gods. And I really feel like this could be a really compelling story that would be well suited for a live action movie that would provide all of the epic action sequences that you would be hoping for in Wonder Woman. But I just don't think that you need to flush out every single solitary dynamic of her character. You can very easily work in the um the the familial ties if you kind of go back in history a little bit. You can have the connective tissue between her and Hippolyta being the Society, if you go that route, and different things like that. Like, there are different modes of storytelling that can connect these pieces without feeling the need to drag down and bog down the DCU by having every single one of their I's dotted and T's crossed by trying to tell all of Diana's story, because all of Diana's story really isn't that compelling, because her timeline is convoluted. Nobody's really taken time to flush out her story in the best possible way. And so I think you focus on the high points and just let Wonder Woman be Wonder Woman outside of that. Next up, Green Lantern. There's two main stories that I feel like need to be told in this era of storytelling. So Hal Jordan is going to be older in all of this. And so I think this is the perfect time to do the Sinestro Corps War. That is just that will showcase the entirety of the Green Lantern Corps. It's a high stakes story. You've got Sinestro, arguably the most famous villain of Green Lantern, and his revenge against the Green Lanterns, that at this point is still led by Hal Jordan. And if you get what we think we're going to get in Hal being killed off in the Lantern show, then we can look at Spectre Day of Judgment, where Hal becomes the new Spectre and focuses on redemption rather than vengeance. And you can tell his story by way of the Spectre rather than telling his story as a Green Lantern, which will open the door for John Stewart, sure, which is fine for all of you Justice League fans out there, that John Stewart is getting his day in the sun. I just don't think his story is all that compelling. Personally, I'm more interested in the potential for Kyle Rayner, Space Jesus. I think that is a great opportunity to potentially bring in Kyle Rayner, make him a Green Lantern. We could even make him a White Lantern. I think that could be awesome to include in, like, because we're building out 10 years worth of stories, guys. We're not just building out the next slate of films. You can do, especially if we're not just focused on bringing the league together, if we're focused on also telling individual stories, we could do a compressed version of basically Jeff Johns' run on Green Lantern, and then end up with White Lantern, Kyle Rayner. So, speaking of Hal Jordan, one of Hal Jordan's good friends in the comics is Barry Allen. My hope is that in all of this, we get an established Barry Allen that either see I would love to be able to my goal is to have Wally West, an adult Wally West. Have an adult Wally West who's operating, and we have Barry either in the background or in some way adjacent to the main story that we're telling with the Flash. You either have Barry be a part of the League and Wally be off on his own or something along those lines. Really the big issue with putting him on the shelf is usually the most direct way that that you have for shelving him is Crisis on Infinite Earths. And the issue with Crisis on Infinite Earths is it was meant to wipe the slate and make everything kind of streamline the continuity. So if we were to say that Crisis already happened, and we are in fact in a post crisis continuity, you're then saying a lot of things happened off screen, and it just kind of complicates a lot of the continuity. That being said, if we do get Wally, I so like think that his first story needs to be the Rogues, and then as he's going through the story, the A story that we are kind of like focused on in all of this, we get the introduction of Hunter Zolomon as the Reverse Flash. Well, he becomes the Reverse Flash by the end of the story. So this is kind of a riff on Flash Blitz, but I wouldn't do it straightforward where that's the story, right? Like you've got Flash and you've got his friend, and by the end it's Flash versus Reverse Flash, because there's so much to Hunter Zolomon that I think you tell his origin separate from the actual like meat and potatoes battle between Wally and Hunter. Because by the time you get you can go through Hunter Zolomon's backstory and his motivations and all of that sort of stuff, and that really sets up for the actual fall, and then the fight between those two as like the nuts and bolts of a full-on Flash movie. That being said, I would love to see Barry and Eobard also going at it. I think those two, like an almost like a riff on Flash War, where instead of being Barry versus Wally, have Barry and Wally versus Hunter and Eobard. But the problem is you kind of have to commit one way or the other to one or the other as far as who is your definitive Flash, unless we somehow break it up otherwise, where we only keep Barry off on the side and then we let Wally be the main focal point for the Flash movies. The last one that I want to touch on is well, the last character I should say that I want to touch on is Batman, obviously. So Court of Owls I think could be a really cool story to tell. I think there's a lot of meat on the bone with using that as a vehicle to flush out Gotham. That being said, I think you can go the route of telling something, telling a story like Tower of Babel at some point in the history. Like a um you have a lead up where Batman's contingency plans are taken by, again, maybe Brainiac, and we get a riff on Tower of Babel where it weakens the team right before the major threat arrives and could also lead to Batman forming the Outsiders, which could become a whole new secondary team for Batman. Um, there are tons of interesting stories that could be told as far as you know you've got Battle for the Cowl, you've got Hush, stuff like that. The Hush I could see, but I don't know as though I would want to see anything revolving around like Jason Todd or the Robin issues, unless we end up in a situation where we're actually going to give that character all of the credence that he deserves, that we actually get a full-blown Jason Todd that isn't a half measure, that he's actually a like the resurrected Jason Todd and is a credible threat. Um let's see here. Yeah, we could because he is very closely tied with Robin, and we could do the wink and a nod to Jason Todd and have Damian be the next Robin after Jason Todd and all of that sort of stuff. Though that does leave out Tim Drake, but I don't know how you. I'm not sure Batman's full rogues or full Bat family works without just saying, "Hey, everybody exists," and they very well could that. It could do that. But I think that's kind of the only way that you can do something like that, because outside of that, you would need to tell origin stories for every one of these characters. And we'd have to worry about spending too much time setting things up and all of that. So, and then you have things like my one of my personal favorites, Green Arrow Longbow Hunters, where I think if you're gonna do Oliver Queen, which I really think they should do Oliver Queen, I think that could be a really cool story to tell. That Longbow Hunters is kind of like the take on Green Arrow and his character, and I think it could add a realistic perspective to this larger than life universe, and is a good way to bring Black Canary very straight into it. And I do think that we should get Oliver and Dinah both. I don't think we should get only one of them or have some weird prolonged love angle or whatever. I think they should just be together. Um yeah, so that's kind of what those are the ones that came to mind. Um, for some of the more compelling ones. I've heard a lot about Judas Contract. I don't know. I think Judas Contract could be fine. I think that could be fun. My biggest problem with Judas Contract is we've seen it, but there's a reason why it's as popular as it is because it's impactful. It's impactful. So, um, chime in. Let me know what you want to see out of the DCU. There are a lot of stories to tell, and I think we can tell some pretty cool ones if we let this actually percolate and cook. I just hope we stay away from most crises. I think if we're going to do any crises, we do something like either Final Hour or something along those lines. I just don't think Crisis on Infinite Earths works unless we're going to really explore out the weird cosmic side of DC. But that's all I got for now. Let me know what you want to see out of the DCEU or of the DCU, and we'll catch you next time.